Hello and welcome back everybody. This is part 3 at this stage of the disassembly and reassembly of a G&G Raider. But I'll grease up the cylinder real quick for you guys as well. So again, get a cloth, clean out the cylinder, take out the cylinder head, just pops out like this in the front. Again, check this rubber on the back of your cylinder head. If it's worn, you need to replace it because it just gets worn from the piston slamming against it. Again, clean this out, and then what I'm going to do is get a little bit of cylinder grease and just put it in there. And I'm just going to get my finger and just do that. There you go, done. A quick little trick for you guys is if you want to check your air compression. Now, your air compression is very important because if you've got a, say for example, like in Ireland we have a 328 FPS or a 1 joule limit. So what you don't want to do is get your gearbox pulling a 1.8 or something ridiculous like that. You don't want to put your gearbox on an unnecessary tension. So you don't want to drop in a 1.8 joule spring just to compensate for lack of air seal. So the best thing to do is just cover this hole here, because obviously this is the hole for the pneumatic blowback. So cover this hole, put your thumb against this, and then get the piston and push it in. But when you push it in really quickly, and if you push it in and it stops and you can't push it in anymore, it means your air seal is very good. But if you can kind of push it in real easily and take it back out, it means you're losing air somewhere. But obviously I can do that just by pushing it in and out. But you want to be able to push it in really quickly to simulate the spring. So just a quick little trick for you guys. So what I'm going to do now is apply grease real quick to the rails of the piston, and that should be it. Let's get it away. Okay, so now I'm going to reassemble this. So the first thing you want to do is you want to start with the so obviously last thing out, first thing in. So the first thing you want to do is start with the cutoff lever. So I'm going to get the cutoff lever now and pop it in here. Get the screw off it. Get the screwdriver. Tighten this back in like that. So you should just be able to move up and down like that freely. Next thing you want to do is get your wiring. Now, like I said last time, I have 3 wires. You'll only have 2 likely. The third one is off my MOSFET. So you want to do is try to keep the wires in the order that they're connected to the trigger switch. So it should just trigger switch should just pop in like this. And there is a little, I'll just grab a screwdriver so I can show you. There's a little piece on the inside of the gearbox that guides the trigger switch in there. So you need to make sure the trigger switch, push it in and then down over this little gap here, over the little rod that sits out of the gearbox. Now next thing you want to do is put all the wiring back inside the trenches for them inside the gearbox, like so. That should stop it from causing any problems. Some gearboxes like this one does have it. Some gearboxes, and it's quite handy, there's actually a little kind of almost like an arm or something, just to be able to push the wire under. The red wire, if it's a front wired rear wired gearbox like this, the red wire actually needs to cross underneath the motor, and if this isn't in properly, the wire can actually get caught in the pinion gear of the motor and actually just get torn to shreds. So it's a really big problem actually. It does happen a good bit. So just make sure you flatten this wire down, make sure it stays in there. And if you flip the gearbox over when it's all back together, you can actually see down into the hole and you can see the red wiring just cutting straight across here. That's bad. You need to make sure that you open the gearbox up and push this red wiring down to make sure it doesn't get caught by the motor. So next what I'm going to do is get the spring off the trigger switch, put it on like that. Actually, you're pretty better off putting it on the other side. So loop it on this side first and then just push it over. And just pull it over the inside the gearbox like so. And that's in now, so that should kind of come forward and back on its own. If it's not long enough or something is wrong with it, that it's kind of sitting like this, it means your gearbox will kind of automatically start firing when you connect the battery because it's always making contact. So just double check that. But I've never actually heard of it happening. It's just something to think about when you're thinking about it. When I'm thinking about it now. So I'm gonna screw this in. It's not going anywhere. Next thing I want to do is get the trigger. If it's a case where your trigger spring keeps falling out, because the trigger spring is obviously facing downwards, and sometimes when you're trying to get it in, it could keep falling out. So get a bit of grease, or even Vaseline, but be very careful with the Vaseline so it doesn't get into the gearbox cell. Get a bit of grease and stick it in onto the trigger spring itself. And that way it won't actually come out when you're trying to put the trigger in. And then put the trigger in, spring back in like so. So double check that. So make sure you put your finger on the trigger so it doesn't fly out. But you should be able to hold it there, and that piece there in the trigger switch shouldn't fly backwards on its own. If it is, it means that the back of the trigger isn't actually it's not catching the back of the trigger switch properly. And your trigger is actually slipping. Next thing I want to do is get this kind of just safety mechanism, if you will. Because I put it back together when I took it apart to stop me losing pieces, I have to take it apart again. So again, what you want to do is lift the gearbox up, don't turn it upside down obviously. So push this through like that. And hello again everybody. So I was reviewing the footage and I realised that I might have kind of gone through the reassembly of the AR latches and the safety mechanism a bit too fast, especially because there's springs in them. Those springs, when you first look at them, they've kind of a weird shape, and although playing around with it you're going to figure out eventually how it sits in, I just thought I'd go through it real quick so that you wouldn't be fiddling around with it when you're actually trying to reassemble the gearbox in one go. So the next thing I'll do is go through the safety mechanism here. What you want to do is, like in the video, I have it here and I put the gearbox over it. This spring is shaped similar to the one off the AR latch, it's just a bit chunkier. But this arm will have a raised piece. You want to make sure that raised piece faces upwards. And again, you get the spring, and you make sure that the spring runs across the bottom of it, up the side, and over the top. And then you just want to, if it's inside the gearbox, you just want to do that, and it sits in, just like that. And again, this arm of the spring here will sit against the inside of the gearbox, and that's what's going to basically, if you pick up the gearbox and play with this side on the outside of the gearbox, it should cause the inside of this arm just to kind of move up and down. Like I mentioned in the video, this you need to make sure that this spring sits properly down this shaft. Now you're not going to be able to get it all the way down because it's actually going to be in the way of the gearbox. But what can sometimes happen is the spring actually gets caught in between these two parts. And if that happens, this is not going to sit down properly. Like it might look a bit like this, where you need to make sure that this whole thing, you can push it down so the top is flush, so you get the screw in. If that doesn't happen, this can actually get caught in between these two pieces. So, you know, just make sure that this is properly around this piece here when it's inside the gearbox. It gets progressively harder to actually work with a gearbox as the longer you're working on it in one sitting, because your hands kind of get greasy and even tired sometimes because you're trying to work with such small pieces. So now the spring for this needs to sit around the bottom of this, so sometimes you can actually get caught in between the two pieces and you can't actually push this down. So make sure that you get the spring down to the very bottom. Get the screw back in. And there you go. It's all working now. So like I said, that's a safety. That's basically what causes your safety to engage when you put the sector switch on safe. Okay, the next thing I want to do is go put the gears in, but I want to go through the gears themselves real quick while I'm in here. So gears here. So when the gearbox actually fires the motor, if I can find it, the motor will come in here, like I said in previous video. Make sure that this isn't worn down, like I said again in the previous video, and this will actually turn the gears. So that'll turn these 3 gears like this, and the top plate, which sits here, is actually caught on this little it's actually caught on the sector gear, and that's what causes the pull back, and that allows the BB to enter the chamber. And then as that happens, the teeth on the sector gear here come in and pull back the piston like so. Okay. And as it reaches the end, there's no more teeth left, and it just stands forward. Now obviously I haven't lined it up properly, but I'll show you guys how to do that as well. And that flies forward, and that pushes all the air out through the air nozzle, and pushes the BB out the chamber. So that's basically how an airsoft rifle works. I'm nearly 100% sure there's actually a video on YouTube of the mechanics of an airsoft rifle. Like, it's kind of a it almost looks like it was done in CAD or something like that. So it's kind of cool. Check that out if you're interested in it. Next I'm going to do is, you kind of want to make sure that the sector gear is it's placed at kind of a 1 to 2 o'clock position, because that'll give you the optimal engagement for the piston. There is whole videos and whole tutorials about AOE, which is the angle of alignment or angle of engagement, and everything else. But I have never really worked with it. I've never done it, and my airsoft rifles are fine. It's more or less to increase rate of fire and all the other kind of. It ensures that the gears are, the teeth on the gears are grabbing the piston perfectly. But as you can see here, they're not actually not worn. If these teeth are worn, again, you need to get that looked at and replace it. So again, like I said, there's nothing wrong with mine, so I'm not really going to bother with all that. So next thing I want to do is put the air nozzle back into the top of the plate. Put this whole section on the cylinder and drop the cylinder in like so. Now the cylinder, the top of the plate is brought back by this spring here, so you need to make sure you don't forget that, because otherwise it's not going to function the way you need it to. So the way I usually do this is I put a screwdriver through that spring itself and just flip it over like that. Yeah, all works. So yeah, get rid of the motor here, it's just in the way. So next thing we're going to do is the piston, and we're going to put the piston in just like so, because just make sure it stays on in the rails on the inside of the gearbox. So if it doesn't, well, A, you're going to wreck the gearbox, and B, it's actually not going to close. So there we go, that's done. Next is the anti-reverse latch, or the AR latch for short. So I'm going to start here with the anti-reversal latch. Basically, anti-reversal latch, it can realistically only go in one way. You have to make sure that the shorter shaft here is in the gearbox, that you're actually, the half of the gearbox you're actually working on. So that you put this down and the other half of the gearbox will actually go over it. Like I said, the Raider anti-reversal latch is slightly different. It has kind of, I like to see it as a counterweight. What it's really for, the Raider anti-reverse latch is kind of shaped like an L. It has another piece sticking at the top. It kind of acts like a counterweight almost, in that when you put it in, you might see it now when you put your own anti-reverse latch in, it's going to keep popping out. Unless you're looking, it just stays in. But the Raider has the forward assist function, decompresses the spring, and that's actually what that other piece is for. It presses the anti-reverse latch down, so it disengages the gears and allows the spring to come backwards. But it works really handy as a counterweight, so that it doesn't keep popping out when you're trying to put the anti-reverse latch back in. So the spring for your anti-reverse latch, it's kind of a weird shape. It's shaped like an L again, but this side here has a it's kind of like two right angles going up. So what you want to do is make sure that put it over the shorter shaft again, and then the spring is going to come across the bottom of the AR latch, up the side of it, and then over the top of it. So orientated the way it should be in the gearbox here. So it should be in like that. And this other arm here actually sits against the gearbox shell on the inside, so that gives it its tension. So when you push this, it should kind of come back on its own. Now you need to make sure that you don't put this in upside down, because if you do, this smooth edge here is not going to grab the gears. It's not going to grab the bottom of the bevel gear, and it won't actually work as an anti-reverse latch. Now it shouldn't go in that way anyway, because like I said, this shorter half is going to allow you to put it into the gearbox. But just if you somehow manage to get it in, you need to make sure you put it the other way around. So you need to have the flat edge facing up towards the spring and the spring guide, and all the other pieces are up in the top of the gearbox. So I'll just do this one more time. So there you go, like that. And you pop it in and then put the bevel gear over it. These things now, the G&G ones actually have a counterweight on the other side here. It's kind of handy because it means that take this off. It actually means that it's not going to cause any problems for it popping out of place itself. If you've got a different side of M4, it's likely that this is just not going to stay in there. Like it's actually a pain, because they just don't stay in properly. It's going to keep coming out, and it's just not going to stay the way you want it to. So, but keep playing with it, and eventually will stay in like that. Kind of holds itself in. Now the middle shaft of the anti-reverse latch, usually they're made of one piece metal, but the G&G Raider one here it's kind of like two pieces, so it's just, the shafts have to fall into the center, but so just fix it there. Next you want to do is get the spring, and this is a non-linear spring, which means that there's coils here that are closer and in the center are closer. What you want to do if you've got one of these is make sure that the side that has the closest coils are against the spring guide. So these are further away than these ones here. So I'm going to put this on the spring guide and feed it through like this. And this is where it might get a bit tricky and messy, because you need to make sure everything's in properly before you try to close this up. And then you need to get a screwdriver used to take this apart. What you want to do is put the gearbox over like this and close this up. Like so. So there's something wrong here because it's not closing properly. So this is likely going to happen a few times, but I can't figure out why it's not closing. So what I'm going to do here is just take this apart again. What you could do is try put the spring in with the gearbox open like this. Now I wouldn't really recommend this, but I'm just going to try this just to see if there's anything wrong with it when I'm trying to close this. It doesn't appear to be. So here we go. This little arm here that engages the safety on your trigger sometimes gets caught on the outside of the gearbox, so just kind of get a flathead and push it in. Now, before you close it up, just press this to make sure it's okay. So, no issues with it. It's no gaps on the outside. So we can go ahead and close this up. Again, like I said previously, just make sure you're holding this down. It might not look like on the video, but I'm actually putting pressure on this to stop it opening up itself. Make sure you do that yourself as well. I can now take my hand off because it's holding itself in. These two screws up front here, I recommend you tighten them, but don't over tighten them, because if you do, now when I was starting Airsoft, some gearboxes didn't have actually this reinforced piece here. It's actually, you can actually see it on your own when it's kind of raised. I remember my first SCAR, I had a SCAR L, it was my first Airsoft rifle, and it didn't have this little raised piece here, which means that the front of the gearbox, like I said, the piston slams against the inside here. That's what causes the air to come out. But that causes a lot of strain in the front of the gearbox, and if you don't have that piece of metal here, it can actually crack up here, and if these two are too tight, it's causing a lot of strain on it. So I'd recommend you don't over tighten these, but obviously tighten the rest of them pretty well. So that's the gearbox back together. If you're following this video for a normal M4, this is probably where you can stop, but this being a Raider, I'm gonna have to keep going and put the pneumatic blowback back onto it. Put this green piece in. Okay, there we go. So now the rest should be pretty straightforward. You know, we took it apart the same way. So make sure that engages properly there, which mine isn't. Now, there we go. Reassuring click. Okay, next I'm going to put this sleeve back over it. Make sure you put it in right. It'll only go in one way properly. There's two little kind of hooks here, and they need to go forward, because they'll actually click in the front of it here and stop you from able to pull this up again. So next thing I'm going to do is put this piece on. Make sure you put it on right with the larger gap towards the back, so you can take it off again later or the next time. So again, seems excessive, but I'm going to use a hammer. Make sure you don't put the gearbox down on the air nozzle. Put it on the side of the desk if you need to. Okay. A few more taps to get this in properly. That still isn't in properly, so I'm going to have to get that in properly before I reassemble the gearbox. So what I'm going to do here is try to do this on the table itself. There's probably a more elegant way of doing this, and you might come up with it yourself. If anybody else does know, maybe even post a comment in the comments. But this is the way I've done it since I needed to take this apart, and it does work. So there you go, it's back together now. Last thing you need, well, the second last thing you do is put this back together. Again, make sure the hooks on the fake bolt sit in the groove, so it slides up and down, but doesn't actually come out. And finally, the C-clip. Now this C-clip, it's going to be just as hard to put back on as it is to get out, because the nature of the shape of it, it can actually kind of just pivot around that central point without actually going in. So there's loads of different ways of doing it. You probably come up with your own. I don't even have a real way of doing it. I just use a flathead and push it down on top of it. But it's gonna be a struggle, I'd imagine, to put this back on unless you're used to working with these. Now, so just double check that it doesn't. If you pull this and the rod inside it is staying inside this tube here, it means that the C-clip isn't on properly. So it's on properly now, so that's okay. And that's gonna wrap it up for part 3 of the reassembly of the gearbox. Finally, the last part I'm gonna do is reassemble the externals and then put the gearbox back inside the Raider so that everything's complete. So again, if any questions, post them in the comments, Facebook us, whatever. We enjoy getting feedback. If there's anything you guys feel that maybe we need to kind of, you know, work on or improve, we do accept constructive criticism. We like it just as much as positive feedback. So anything you guys want to say, fire away. And yeah, stay tuned for the last part where I reassemble everything and actually get this rifle back the way it was. So thanks for watching.